A cleaning lady is humiliated in front of 300 high society guests at Chicago's most extravagant party. The city's most powerful billionaire forces her to sit at the same table with the elite, only to watch her fall apart. But when she opens her mouth, the room falls silent. No one knows that this floor cleaner harbors a secret that could destroy a multi-billion-dollar empire. Today's story will keep you glued to the screen. Watch until the end, hit like, and comment with the name of the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has progressed. The rain came sideways that night, slashing against the servants' entrance of the Moretti estate, like the sky itself wanted to wash the place off the map. Sophia Vale stood at the industrial sink in the basement kitchen, both hands buried in soapy water, scrubbing wine glasses so thin she could feel them flex between her fingers. One wrong squeeze and they'd shatter. She'd learned that lesson her second week, the sound of breaking crystal, then Vittorio Moretti's head of security appearing in the doorway with dead eyes and a clipboard, deducting the cost from her paycheck before the shards hit the floor. 3 years of that. 3 years of swallowed words and lowered eyes and footsteps so quiet they barely disturbed the air. Upstairs, 100 voices roared with the particular volume of people who had never been told to keep it down. The annual Winter Sovereign Gala was reaching its crescendo, that hour of the night when the champagne hit bloodstreams hard enough to loosen tongues and tighten alliances. Sophia knew the rhythm by heart. First the cocktails and the smiling, then the toasts and the posturing, then the backroom deals that smelled like cigar smoke and threat, and finally, sometime around midnight, the inevitable mess. Broken glass, spilled bourbon on Persian rugs, occasionally blood on the bathroom marble, though nobody ever called it that. A nosebleed, they'd say. An accident. Sophia had cleaned enough accidents to know better. She dried the last glass and placed it on the tray with mechanical precision, each one positioned so the stems wouldn't knock during transit. Maria, the head of kitchen staff, caught her arm as she reached for the tray. "Don't go up yet," Maria whispered. Her fingers dug in hard enough to leave marks. "He's in a mood." She didn't need to say who. Damien Moretti's moods were a weather system inside the estate. Invisible, atmospheric, felt by everyone simultaneously. The kitchen staff tracked them the way sailors tracked storms. A slammed door on the 3rd floor at noon meant stay below stairs until dinner. A quiet phone call in the library at 2 a.m. meant someone's life had changed irreversibly. A smile at breakfast meant absolutely nothing, because Damien smiled the way other men loaded guns. As preparation, not expression. "I have 12 glasses to deliver before the Watanabe toast," Sophia said. "If they're late, we both answer for it." Maria's hand fell away. She crossed herself and turned back to the stove. Sophia lifted the tray and walked toward the service elevator, her black uniform pressed sharp, her dark hair pulled back so tight it tugged at her temples. She caught her reflection in the stainless steel door as it opened. A lean face, high cheekbones, eyes that gave away nothing. 26 years old, and she looked both younger and older than her age, depending on the light. Younger in the softness around her mouth. Older in the flatness behind her eyes, like someone had drawn a curtain across whatever used to live there. The elevator groaned upward. Through the walls she could hear the bass notes of the string quartet Damien hired every year from the Chicago Symphony, first-chair musicians who played his gala for fees that could cover Sophia's rent for a decade. The absurdity of it had stopped registering somewhere around month 4. Outrage required energy she couldn't afford. The doors opened onto the service corridor behind the main ballroom, and the sound hit her like a wall. Laughter, clinking crystal, the wet murmur of expensive conversation. Sophia moved through the narrow passage with the tray balanced on her left palm, pushed through the swinging door, and entered the ballroom. 300 guests filled the Moretti Grand Hall beneath chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen rain. The women wore gowns that cost more than Sophia's annual salary. The men wore watches that cost more than the gowns. Every surface gleamed, the marble floors, the gold-leafed molding, the polished mahogany bar that ran 30 feet along the east wall. It was beautiful the way a loaded weapon was beautiful, all precision and implied violence beneath the shine. Sophia wove between clusters of guests with practiced invisibility. Eyes slid past her like she was furniture. A woman in emerald silk reached for a glass without looking at Sophia's face. Just a manicured hand extending into space, expecting the glass to appear, which it did. Sophia had perfected the art of existing without being perceived, moving through rooms full of the most powerful people in the Midwest like a ghost in a black uniform. She was halfway across the floor when she felt it, that particular silence that meant Damian Moretti was watching something. She didn't look up. Looking up was a mistake she'd watched other staff make, catching his eye, holding it a fraction too long, suddenly becoming visible in a room where visibility could get you destroyed. Instead, she adjusted her trajectory toward the bar, angling away from the grand staircase where she knew he stood. But Damian's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. "Bring the maid here." The words carried the specific weight of a man who had never in his life repeated himself. The string quartet softened. Conversations dimmed in concentric circles outward from the staircase, heads turning one by one until 300 pairs of eyes found Sophia frozen between a state senator and an oil executive's wife. Her hands did not shake. She noted this with detached precision, the way a surgeon might note steady vitals during a crisis. The tray remained level. The glasses did not clink. Whatever was happening inside her chest, and something was happening, something cold and electric that climbed her spine like voltage, none of it reached her hands. A security man appeared at her elbow, young, thick-necked, apologetic in a way that made it worse. "Miss, he's asking for you." Sophia walked toward the staircase. Damian Moretti stood on the third step, which put him a full head above the crowd. A position she understood was deliberate, because everything about Damian was deliberate. He was 34, built lean and hard beneath a charcoal suit that probably cost 5 figures, dark hair pushed back from a face that magazines called handsome and anyone who'd seen him angry called terrifying. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, his eyes nearly black, and when he smiled, it never quite reached them. He held a glass of whiskey the way he held everything, Bess, loosely, like he could drop it or throw it, and either option amused him equally. Celeste Laurent stood one step below him, her hand on his arm with performative possessiveness. Blonde, angular, draped in a white gown, and enough diamonds to blind anyone who looked directly at her. Damian's fiancée for 11 months now, and in that time Celeste had made the household staff's lives a specific kind of misery, the kind that came with a smile and plausible deniability. She was the one who reported infractions, the one who noticed a wrinkle in a tablecloth from across a room, the one who had gotten 3 maids fired in 6 months for offenses so minor they barely qualified as mistakes. Celeste saw Sophia approaching and her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Damian, really?" Celeste said. "She's filthy." "She's fine," Damian said without looking at Celeste. Sophia stopped at the base of the staircase and stood still with the tray balanced on her palm. She kept her eyes level, not down, not up, neutral. The posture of someone who understood exactly where they stood in this room and refused to perform shame about it. Damian descended one step and looked at her the way a collector examines a piece he can't quite categorize. "Tell me something, Sophia." He said her name slowly, tasting it. "Do you even know what a party like this costs?" Scattered laughter from the crowd. Not cruel yet. Testing, waiting to see where this went. Sophia said nothing. Damian lifted a champagne glass from her tray and held it up to the chandelier light, examining it like evidence. "You spend your life cleaning floors in this house," he continued, and now his voice carried the theatrical projection of a man who understood exactly how to work a room. "Polishing silverware, scrubbing toilets. And tonight," he paused, sipped the champagne, set the glass back on her tray with a click. "Tonight, I want to see something different." He turned to the crowd with that smile, the loaded one. "Sit at my table. Eat with us. Drink with us." Another pause, calibrated for maximum damage. "Let's see how long before the maid embarrasses herself." The ballroom erupted. 300 people laughing. Not all of them, Sophia registered. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked away. But enough. Enough laughter to fill the vaulted ceiling and bounce off the crystal and hit her from every direction like stones. Celeste's laugh was the loudest. A bright, delighted sound, the laugh of a woman who had just been handed exactly what she wanted. Sophia stood in the center of it and felt her heartbeat in her teeth. She had 2 choices. Walk away, back to the kitchen, back to the sink, Back to 3 more years of invisibility while the people who destroyed her father drank champagne above her head. Or stay. Sit at that table. Let them throw their worst at her and refuse to break. It wasn't really a choice at all. Sophia set the tray down on the nearest surface, smoothed the front of her uniform, and looked at Damien Moretti for the first time. Not through him, not past him, not at the middle distance the way servants were trained to do. She looked directly into his eyes. Something shifted in his face. A micro-expression, there and gone. Surprise or recognition, or something he didn't have a name for yet. "Which seat?" Sophia asked. Her voice was steady and low and carried no emotion whatsoever, and it cut through the remaining laughter like a knife through paper. Damien stared at her for 2 full seconds. Then he extended his hand toward the grand dining table. The table seated 24. Sophia was placed between a real estate developer named Hargrove, who smelled like scotch and entitlement, and a corporate attorney whose name she immediately forgot because she was too busy cataloging exit routes. Across from her sat Celeste, positioned with strategic precision, close enough to strike, far enough to maintain deniability. The attack began before the first course arrived. Hargrove leaned toward Sophia with the exaggerated friendliness of a man who wanted witnesses to his generosity. "So, the help. Tell me, which fork do you use first?" He gestured at the place setting. 4 forks, 3 knives, 2 spoons, enough crystal for a small chandelier. A battlefield of etiquette designed specifically to expose anyone who didn't belong. Sophia picked up the outermost fork without hesitation. "This one," she said. "Continental style. You work inward. Though technically, the arrangement is incorrect. The dessert fork should be placed horizontally above the plate, not beside the bread knife." Silence from Hargrove. A woman 3 seats down, the wife of a shipping magnate, covered her mouth. Celeste leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light like a threat. "How adorable," Celeste said. "The maid reads etiquette books. Tell me, Sophia, is that something you study between toilet cleanings, or do you practice with plastic forks in the kitchen?" Laughter, but thinner now, less certain. "Neither," Sophia said. "My mother taught me when I was 7. Something flickered across Celeste's face. A crack in the porcelain, quickly sealed. She shifted tactics with the speed of someone who had spent her entire life in social combat. "Your mother," Celeste repeated. "And where is she now? Cleaning someone else's house?" "She's dead." The table went quiet. Sophia said it without inflection, without grief, without the theatrical pause that might have earned sympathy. Just a fact, delivered flatly, the way you'd report the weather. And somehow that flatness hit harder than tears would have. Damien watched from the head of the table. His whiskey sat untouched. The first course arrived. A seared foie gras with fig reduction that Sophia could smell was slightly over-caramelized, though she doubted anyone else at the table had a palate refined enough to notice. She ate with quiet precision, not rushing, not performing, just eating the way someone eats when they've been genuinely hungry before and understand that food is fuel, not theater. The investor seated at Damien's right, a hedge fund manager named Castellano, decided to take his turn. "I have to say," Castellano announced, swirling his wine, "this is the most entertaining gala yet. A maid at the table. What's next, Damien? The gardener for dessert?" More laughter. Damien's mouth twitched, but his eyes stayed on Sophia. "Tell us, sweetheart," Castellano continued, leaning across the table toward Sophia with the particular condescension of a man who called all women sweetheart. "What exactly qualifies you to sit here? Besides Damien's sense of humor?" Sophia set down her fork. She looked at Castellano with an expression that could have been patience or could have been pity, impossible to distinguish. "You manage the Castellano Meridian Fund," she said. "Last quarter you were down 11% against the S&P. Your largest position, Southeast Asian Container Shipping Futures, is leveraged at a ratio that would make your investors physically ill if they understood it. You're at this party because you need Moretti capital to cover a margin call you've been hiding since October." The silence that followed was absolute. Castellano's face went through 3 colors in quick succession: white, red, then a gray-green that matched the fig reduction on his plate. "How the hell?" "I read," Sophia said simply. She picked up her fork and resumed eating. At the head of the table, Damien Moretti leaned back in his chair with an expression nobody at that table had ever seen on his face before. He looked unsettled. Celeste, recognizing the danger of losing control of the narrative, launched her final assault. She stood, champagne glass in hand, and addressed the table with the bright cruelty of a woman whose primary talent was destruction disguised as wit. "I think we should toast our guest," Celeste announced, "to Sophia. Proof that in America, even the girl who scrubs your floors can sit at your table. For one night, at least, before she goes back where she belongs." Glasses rose uncertainly around the table. Sophia did not stand, did not react. She sat perfectly still with her hands in her lap and waited for the laughter to settle. Then she spoke. "Vous savez, Celeste," Sophia said, and her French was flawless, Parisian, precise, the accent of someone who had learned the language not from textbooks but from native speakers. "Votre prononciation de Laurent est incorrecte. C'est un nom français, et pourtant vous le prononcez comme si c'était du plastique." The table froze. Celeste's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sophia continued, still seated, still calm, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had stopped pretending hours ago. "You mispronounce your own surname. Every time you introduce yourself, every time someone says it at these events, it's wrong. And no one has ever corrected you because no one at this table respects you enough to tell you the truth." Celeste's champagne glass trembled in her hand. "You don't know anything about me," Celeste whispered, but her voice had lost its edge. I know that your family's wealth came from your grandfather's textile factories in Lyon," Sophia said. "I know the Laurent name used to mean something in French industrial society. And I know that you dropped out of the Sorbonne after one semester because, in your own words to Paris Match magazine, I found the academics tedious. So perhaps before you quiz the maid on which fork to use, you should consider that the maid finished what you couldn't start." Nobody breathed. Damien's hand tightened around his whiskey glass so hard Sophia heard the crystal creak. Celeste sat down without a word. Her face looked like something had been surgically removed from it. The confidence, the cruelty, the architecture of superiority she wore like her diamonds. All of it gone in 30 seconds. The rest of the dinner passed in stunned near silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and the string quartet playing something melancholic that matched the mood. Sophia ate her meal. She did not gloat. She did not make eye contact with anyone. She existed in the strange new territory she had carved out, no longer invisible, not yet understood. Then, at precisely 9:47, the side door of the ballroom opened, and a man walked in who changed the trajectory of the entire evening. Kenji Watanabe was 73 years old, 5'4", and worth approximately $12 billion. He controlled the largest private shipping fleet in the Pacific Rim, and for the past 18 months, Damien Moretti had been trying to secure a joint venture that would connect Moretti's Great Lakes operation with Watanabe's Trans-Pacific routes, a deal worth $400 million, and the key to Damien's plan to take the empire legitimate. The problem arrived with him. Watanabe's translator, a young man from the Tokyo office who had been briefed on every detail of the negotiation, was not there. A frantic phone call from his hotel revealed a burst appendix, an ambulance, an emergency room, and absolutely no possibility of translation tonight. Damien's face went flat. Sophia recognized the expression. She'd seen it before arguments that ended with broken furniture. He turned to his chief of staff, a gaunt man named Renner, and spoke low enough that only the people nearest could hear. "Find someone who speaks Japanese, now." "Sir, at this hour. I don't care if you pull someone off the street. Find a translator, or this deal dies tonight." Renner pulled out his phone and started making calls with the desperate energy of a man whose continued employment depended on solving an unsolvable problem in the next 10 minutes. Sophia watched from her seat. She watched Watanabe standing politely near the entrance with two aides, smiling the patient smile of a man accustomed to Western chaos. She watched Damien's jaw working, the tendons in his neck visible beneath his collar. She watched Renner's calls going nowhere. She should have stayed quiet. Every survival instinct she had developed over 3 years in this house told her to stay invisible, stay silent, Let the powerful men solve their powerful problems while she finished her dinner and returned to the kitchen where she belonged. But Sophia Vale had not spent 2 years learning Japanese just to watch a conversation fail. She pushed back her chair and stood, every eye at the table turned toward her. She walked across the ballroom floor, the maid in the black uniform, the girl they had mocked for 2 hours, and stopped directly in front of Kenji Watanabe. Then she bowed, not the casual Western approximation, but a proper Japanese bow, 15 degrees, hands at her sides, held for exactly the right duration. And she spoke. Watanabe-sama, konbanwa. Moretti shi no kawarini, go sudan no tsuyaku wo tsutome sasete itadakimasu. Perfect Japanese. Not textbook Japanese. Lived Japanese, with the subtle honorific layering that distinguished genuine fluency from academic competence. Watanabe's eyes widened. Then he smiled, a real smile, the first genuine expression Sophia had seen all night, and responded in rapid Japanese that she followed without hesitation. Behind her, the ballroom had gone completely silent. Damien Moretti stood at the head of the grand staircase with his whiskey glass frozen halfway to his mouth, staring at Sophia Vale like the floor had just opened beneath his feet. For 30 minutes, Sophia translated. Not just words, context, nuance, the elaborate dance of Japanese business communication where what wasn't said mattered as much as what was. She navigated Watanabe's concerns about regulatory exposure, explained Moretti's proposed revenue-sharing structure in terms that respected Japanese corporate hierarchy, and at one critical moment, when Damien made a characteristically blunt demand that would have offended Watanabe's sensibilities, she softened the translation with a cultural framing that preserved Damien's intent while honoring Watanabe's dignity. By 10:30, Watanabe was laughing. By 10:45, he was nodding. By 11 o'clock, he extended his hand to Damien and said, through Sophia, that he looked forward to finalizing the contract in Tokyo next month. $400 million. Saved by the maid. The guests who remained watched Sophia return to her seat with expressions that ranged from disbelief to something approaching fear. The woman who had been entertainment an hour ago had just demonstrated in front of every powerful person in Chicago that she was smarter than all of them. Celeste had disappeared sometime during the translation. Nobody noticed. The gala wound down. Guests left in clusters, their laughter replaced by low murmuring, the sound of people reassessing everything they thought they knew. Sophia helped the remaining kitchen staff clear glasses, slipping back into her role with a fluidity that somehow made the evening's performance even more unsettling. She carried trays, she wiped tables, she became invisible again so smoothly it felt like a magic trick in reverse. But Damien Moretti did not leave. He stood in the library doorway at 11:40 and watched her carry a tray of empty glasses down the service corridor. When she passed him, he spoke. "In here." It wasn't a request. It was barely even words. More like gravity, a force that pulled her off her trajectory without giving her a choice about it. Sophia set the tray down on a side table and walked into the library. Rain still lashed the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room smelled like old leather and whiskey, and the particular staleness of books nobody read. Damien closed the door behind her and stood with his back against it, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that felt almost clinical. "Who are you?" he asked. "Sophia Vale. I clean your house." "Don't." The word came out harder than he probably intended. He pushed off the door and walked toward her, stopping close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and the cedar in his cologne. "You speak French, Japanese. You know hedge fund positions and table settings and how to navigate a negotiation with a man who's refused meetings with heads of state." He paused. "People like you don't end up cleaning my floors unless something destroyed them." Sophia felt the ground shift beneath her. Not physically, emotionally. The architecture of her 3-year disguise trembling under the weight of a man who was looking at her, actually looking for the first time. "You should have let me stay invisible, Mr. Moretti." That stopped being an option about 3 hours ago. They stood in silence while the rain hammered the windows and the last sounds of the gala faded into the distant parts of the mansion. Sophia could feel the heat radiating off him, could see the pulse in his throat, could read the confusion in his eyes. And beneath the confusion, something else, Something that scared her more than the cruelty at the dinner table. Curiosity. Damien Moretti was curious about her. And Sophia knew from 3 years of watching this man operate that his curiosity was the most dangerous thing about him. When Damien became curious about a business rival, he dismantled them. When he became curious about a politician, he owned them. When he became curious about a person, she didn't want to finish that thought. "I need to get back to the kitchen," Sophia said. "The kitchen can wait." "No," she said, and something in her voice made him stop. "It can't." She walked past him toward the door. As her hand touched the handle, Damien spoke again, quietly now, the theatrical projection gone, replaced by something rawer. "I'm going to find out who you are, Sophia." She paused with her back to him. Her hand tightened on the brass handle until her knuckles went white. "Then you'll wish you hadn't," she said. She left the library without looking back, and Damien Moretti stood alone among the shelves of unread books, staring at the door she'd closed behind her, feeling something crack open inside his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know its name yet, but it terrified him. 3 floors below, Sophia reached the kitchen, set her tray on the counter, and pressed both palms flat against the cold steel surface until her breathing steadied. Maria was gone. The kitchen was empty. The only sound was the rain and the distant ticking of the industrial clock above the service entrance. She closed her eyes. 3 years of silence. 3 years of invisibility. 3 years of living inside the house of the family that destroyed everything she loved, waiting for the moment she could. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out. An unknown number, a single text message. "I know who you really are, Sophia Valenti, and so will he. Soon." Sophia's blood went cold. She stared at the screen while the rain hammered the windows above her and the kitchen clock ticked toward midnight, and she understood with absolute bone-deep certainty that the life she had built inside these walls, the disguise, the patience, the plan that had sustained her through 1,000 humiliations, was about to be ripped apart. Someone knew. And by morning, Damien Moretti would know too. Sophia did not sleep. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, a room barely wide enough to turn around in, with a single window that faced the estate's north garden, and held her phone in both hands while the rain slowly exhausted itself against the glass. By 3 in the morning, it had faded to a drizzle. By 4, it was gone entirely, replaced by the kind of silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. She read the text 17 times, not because the words were complicated, because she was looking for something in them, a signature, a tells, anything that might tell her whether this was a warning or a countdown. "I know who you really are, Sophia Valenti, and so will he. Soon." The name hit her every time like a physical thing. Valenti. She hadn't been called that in 5 years. Had legally changed it 4 years ago, buried the paperwork inside a clerical avalanche, paid a lawyer in Evanston $3,000, money she'd borrowed and spent 18 months repaying to make sure Sophia Valenti ceased to exist in any database a casual search would turn up. Whoever sent this message was not running a casual search. She deleted the text. Then she sat with the blank screen and thought about her options with the methodical precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment without ever believing it would actually arrive. Option 1, run. Pack the duffel bag under her bed, she kept it half-packed as a permanent precaution, and walk out the service entrance before dawn. Disappear into the city. Start the whole process over somewhere else, another house, another family, another 3 years of building access and proximity from scratch. Option 2, stay, call the bluff. Whoever sent the message wanted her rattled, wanted her to run or panic or do something that would expose her before she was ready. Running now would confirm everything. And running now meant abandoning 5 years of work, every document she had photographed, every conversation she had memorized, every piece of the architecture she had carefully assembled inside these walls. There was no good option. There was only the one she could live with. Sophia set her phone face down on the nightstand, lay back on top of the covers fully dressed, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She just existed in the darkness behind her eyelids and made herself breathe slowly until her heartbeat stopped feeling like a fist trying to punch through her ribcage. At 6:15, she showered, dressed in her uniform, and went downstairs to start the morning. The estate operated on a strict post-gala protocol. The household staff arrived by 6:30 to begin the systematic dismantling of the previous night, collecting abandoned crystal from windowsills and bathroom counters, stripping the ballroom of its decorations, sending the rented furniture back to the vendor, erasing all evidence that 300 people had filled these rooms until nothing remained but the ordinary silence of the Moretti family's daily life. Sophia moved through it automatically. Her body knew the work so completely that her mind could run parallel tracks, folding table linens, checking champagne glasses against a master inventory, rolling up protective floor coverings, while another part of her watched everything and everyone with the quiet vigilance of an animal that understood the terrain had changed overnight. Celeste was the first variable. She appeared in the ballroom at 7:45, still in last night's clothes, which meant she either hadn't slept or had slept somewhere that wasn't her bedroom. Her hair was still up but coming apart at the sides, pins scattered, and she held a coffee mug with both hands like it was the only solid object in the world. She looked at Sophia across the half-dismantled ballroom with an expression that had none of last night's performance in it. No cruelty, no brightness, just a flat and careful assessment. Then Celeste walked toward her. Sophia continued folding a tablecloth, her back to the approaching sound of heels on marble. "You made a mistake last night," Celeste said. Not loud. Conversational, almost. Sophia finished the fold and reached for the next cloth. "Which one?" "All of them." Celeste stopped 2 feet away, close enough that Sophia could smell her perfume, something expensive and nocturnal, too heavy for morning. "You think you won something. You think impressing Damien and saving his deal makes you untouchable." "I don't think anything," Sophia said. "I did my job." "You weren't doing your job. You were doing something else." Celeste's voice dropped. "And I know it." Sophia set down the tablecloth and turned to face her. Celeste's eyes were sharper than they'd been the night before. The alcohol burned off, the performance stripped away, leaving something harder and more dangerous underneath. This was the real Celeste Laurent, Sophia understood. Last night's version had been theater. This woman was not performing anything. "What do you want?" Sophia asked. "I want you out of this house." "Then speak to whoever handles staffing." "I'm speaking to you." Celeste stepped closer. Her jaw was tight, the muscle near her ear working in a way that betrayed genuine agitation beneath the controlled surface. "I've been with Damien for 11 months. I know him better than anyone in this building, and I know that look he gets when something catches him." Sophia said nothing. "He looked at you like that last night." "He looked at me like I was an inconvenience," Sophia said, which is accurate. "Don't!" Celeste's voice cracked on the word just slightly, just enough to show the seam. "Don't be clever with me. Not right now. We're not in the ballroom anymore." A beat of silence. Somewhere behind them, a junior staff member dropped something metallic and swore quietly. Neither of them moved. "What you did last night," Celeste said slowly, the Japanese, the translation, impressing his business contact, "Damien will investigate you now. You understand that? He investigates everyone who interests him. He has people whose only job is to turn over rocks and see what's living underneath them." Sophia felt the cold from the text message move through her chest again, but she kept her face neutral. "Then he'll find that I'm a maid," Sophia said, "which he already knows." Celeste studied her. Something shifted in her eyes, not softening exactly, more like the moment before a decision. "I'm going to ask you once," Celeste said. "Who are you really?" The question landed exactly the way it had from Damien the night before, but it felt completely different. Damien had asked from fascination, from the hunger of a man encountering something he couldn't classify. Celeste asked from fear. Beneath the diamonds and the cruelty and the social weaponry, Celeste Laurent was afraid. That was interesting. That was also dangerous, because frightened people did unpredictable things. "I'm Sophia Vale," Sophia said. "I've worked in this house for 3 years. I'm good at my job and I stay out of everyone's way. That's all there is." Celeste looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee mug from the table where she'd set it and walked away without another word. Sophia watched her go. Then she turned back to the tablecloths and resumed folding, her hands moving in the same steady rhythm, her face giving nothing away. But her mind was running very fast now. Damien didn't surface until 9. Sophia heard him before she saw him. The particular silence that preceded him. Staff members suddenly acquiring tasks in other rooms, conversations dropping off. And she was cleaning the library windows with a chamois cloth when he appeared in the doorway. He was dressed, coffee in hand, and he looked like a man who had not slept any more than she had. The dark circles were there if you knew where to look, and the set of his jaw had that particular tension of someone running on will and caffeine. He stood in the doorway and watched her work without speaking. Sophia continued with the windows. "I pulled your employment file this morning," Damien said. She didn't stop moving. "All right. 3 years, clean record, 1 commendation from the household manager for..." He paused, and she could hear him reading, "Exceptional discretion during the March hospitality event." He paused again. "That was the night Senator Heller got drunk and fell through a display case in the second-floor gallery. He caught the frame with his shoulder. I helped clean the glass and didn't mention it to anyone." "Discretion," Damien said. "Right." He crossed the library and sat in the leather chair near the window. The chair he used when he was thinking, Sophia had learned. Not the one at his desk, not the one by the fireplace. This one, angled toward the room with its back to the wall. A chair positioned for the sightlines of a man who never entirely relaxed. "Your file says you're from Columbus," he said. "Yes." "Prior employment at the Ashfield Hotel 3 years before that." "Yes." "Before the Ashfield, it just says service industry. No specifics." Sophia moved to the next window. Her reflection moved with her, faint and transparent against the gray morning outside. "I worked in restaurants," she said. "A catering company. A few private households. Nothing glamorous." "Education?" "Some college. I didn't finish." The lie was old, worn smooth with repetition. "It didn't suit me." Damien was quiet for a moment. She heard the sound of him setting down his coffee cup on the side table, the small ceramic clink of it. "You're Japanese," he said. "You don't learn Japanese in restaurants." "I lived with a Japanese family for 2 years when I was in my early 20s, Sophia said. She had prepared this answer years ago, a backstory layered precisely with enough verifiable texture to withstand casual scrutiny. "The Nakamura family in Columbus. They needed live-in help, I needed housing. The daughter taught me." Silence. "You corrected a Dante misquote last night," Damien said. "I read a lot. You identified Castellano's fund position accurately enough to put him in a cold sweat. Financial news is public record. I read that too." Another silence, longer. Sophia finished the second window and moved to the third, the furthest from where he sat, and kept her back to him while she worked. "You're very good at this," Damien said. "At cleaning windows?" "At answering every question without actually answering anything." She said nothing. Outside the window, 2 groundskeepers were raking the gravel path that ran along the north garden, their movements slow and methodical in the cold morning air. Normal, ordinary, the world continuing its regular operations while she stood inside a library with the most dangerous man she'd ever met and tried to survive a conversation with him. "Renner looked into you this morning," Damien said. Sophia's hand paused on the chamois cloth for exactly 1 second. Then she resumed. "And?" she said. "Columbus address checks out. Employment history checks out. References check out." Another pause. "Everything checks out a little too cleanly, like someone filed it that way on purpose." She turned from the window and faced him. Damien was watching her with the particular stillness of a man who had spent his entire life reading people and was currently reading her as carefully as he'd ever read anyone. "What do you want from me, Mr. Moretti?" Sophia asked. "I want to know why someone with your abilities is cleaning my windows." "Maybe I like clean windows." His jaw tightened. "Damien," he said. "Excuse me?" "My name. Use it." He stood from the chair, unhurried, and walked toward her. "We're past Mr. Moretti. I made you sit at my table and humiliate yourself in front of half of Chicago. We're past formal address." Sophia held her ground as he approached. He stopped 2 feet from her, the same distance Celeste had maintained, she noticed. And then she noticed that she was noticing that, which meant something was happening to her equilibrium, and she needed to correct it. "You didn't humiliate me," she said. "I tried to." "I know." He looked at her for a long moment. Up close, without the theater of the ballroom and the manipulation of the dinner table, Damien Moretti looked tired. Not physically. The man had the energy of something built for endurance. Tired in another way. In the way of someone who had been running a performance for so long they'd forgotten what they looked like without it. "Why didn't you break?" he asked. Quiet. Genuinely quiet. Not the loaded quiet of the night before. "Because breaking would have been easy," Sophia said. "And I've never liked easy." Something moved across his face. Not the smile. Something below it. His phone rang. He held her gaze for another beat, then pulled it out and looked at the screen. The expression that followed was the one she recognized from bad nights. The flat, depthless look that meant the world was about to reorganize itself around a problem. "I have to take this," he said. He walked out of the library without looking back. Sophia stood between the windows and exhaled, long and controlled, until the trembling in her hands she'd been suppressing became visible in the empty room, and she let it run through her for 5 seconds before shutting it down again. Mom. She found the first investigator at noon. He was parked on the service road behind the estate, a gray sedan, 2 years old, ordinary to the point of deliberateness. Sophia noticed it when she was carrying linens to the external laundry facility, a walk that took her past the rear gate. The man inside the sedan was reading a newspaper, which meant he was doing exactly the opposite of that. He had the specific stillness of someone trained to look idle, shoulders too relaxed, head angle too neutral, the performance of boredom by a person constitutionally incapable of it. Private investigator, she decided. Not law enforcement. Wrong vehicle, wrong posture, wrong energy. Someone hired for observation, not action. Damien had moved fast. She completed her laundry run without altering her pace or her expression, logged the sedan's partial plate in her memory, and went back inside. By 2 in the afternoon, she'd identified a second one, right? A woman in a running jacket who had been circling the estate's public perimeter 3 times in 2 hours. Same too casual energy. Same professional stillness beneath the performance of normalcy. So, 2 externals and almost certainly an internal component. Someone inside the house cross-referencing her story against whatever Renner had already turned up. The clean employment record had bought her time, but not much. Someone thorough enough would eventually find the seams. The Columbus address was real but shallow. A forwarded mail service, a paid reference, the kind of infrastructure that held up against a standard background check, but not against a sustained dig. Eventually they'd find the gap. The 2 years before Columbus where Sophia Valenti simply didn't exist in any database because she'd been living under a different name with a grief so large it had functioned as its own kind of camouflage. She needed to move faster than they were digging. She had a plan for this. She had always had a plan for this. But the plan had assumed she'd have more time, weeks, maybe months, and instead she had days, maybe less. At 3:15, she went to the estate's administrative office on the pretense of restocking supplies, and while the day administrator was fielding a catering invoice dispute, Sophia photographed 3 documents from the open filing cabinet beside her workstation. She'd done this before. She was careful, practiced, fast, phone angled at 30 degrees, 3-second exposures, cabinet drawer slid shut without sound. The documents were shipping manifests from the previous fiscal quarter. On their own, they meant nothing. As part of the larger architecture she'd been assembling for 18 months, they were another brick. She sent the photographs to an encrypted cloud address before she reached the supply room. At 4:47, Celeste found Vittorio. Sophia didn't see this happen. She reconstructed it afterward from the cascade of effects, the particular atmosphere shift that moved through the estate like a pressure change before a storm. Staff members who had been relaxed and chatty after the post-gala cleanup went quiet, absorbed into their individual tasks, eyes down. Vittorio's 2 personal security men, former military, both of them, carrying themselves with the economic movement of people who had done violence and were prepared to do more, appeared in the main corridor at 5 o'clock and took up positions near the East Wing entrance. Vittorio Moretti was Damien's uncle, and in every sense that mattered, the thing Damien had been built from. 71 years old, heavy through the shoulders, with the face of a man who had won so many confrontations they'd worn the expression into neutral. He appeared at family events twice a year, occupied the East Wing suite when he did, and the atmosphere in the house changed immediately and completely every time he walked through the door. The way water changes when something large moves beneath the surface. Sophia had been careful with Vittorio, more careful than with anyone else in the building, more careful than she was with Damien. Because Damien was dangerous the way a weapon was dangerous, powerful, direct, predictable in its violence. Vittorio was dangerous the way a structure was dangerous. You didn't see the threat until the thing collapsed on you. She crossed paths with him once that evening, in the second-floor corridor near the family portrait gallery. He was walking toward the East Wing, hands clasped behind his back, moving slowly in the way of a man who had nowhere to be but occupied every space he was in completely. 2 steps behind him, Celeste. Celeste's eyes found Sophia across the corridor immediately. The expression on her face was unreadable. Not guilty, not triumphant, not afraid. Blank in the particular way of someone who had made a decision and was now watching its consequences begin to unfold. Vittorio's eyes passed over Sophia without stopping. The assessment of something he hadn't registered as relevant. Not yet. Sophia nodded respectfully, pressing herself to the wall to give them passage, her eyes down, her posture exactly what it had always been. The invisible maid, the background furniture, nothing worth looking at twice. They passed. She counted 14 seconds before she moved. She was in the kitchen at 8:30 when Maria caught her arm for the second time in 2 days. "There are men in the servants' quarters," Maria said. Her voice was barely above a sound. Her face had the color of someone who had been frightened and then told herself not to be and failed at the second part. "Vittorio's men. They said it's a routine security check." Sophia's hand stilled on the prep counter. "When?" she asked. "An hour ago. They're going room by room." Maria's fingers dug into her arm. "Sophia, I don't know what's happening, but whatever it is Damien in the building?" Sophia asked. "He left at 7. Business meeting downtown. He won't be back until—" "Okay." Sophia pulled her arm free gently. "Thank you, Maria." "Sophia." But she was already moving. She crossed the kitchen, pushed through the back corridor, took the rear stairs 2 at a time. Her room was on the 3rd floor of the servants' wing, at the end of the east corridor, the last room before the fire exit. She had chosen that room deliberately, 3 years ago, for exactly the reason she was now moving at a controlled run toward it. She heard them before she saw them. Heavy footsteps, the creak of a door, low voices speaking in the cadence of a professional search. 2 rooms away. 1. Sophia's door was locked. She had the key in her uniform pocket. She unlocked it in one motion and pushed inside. The duffel bag under the bed. She went to her knees and pulled it out, unzipped the front pocket, checked by touch. The encrypted drive was there, small and cold and solid between her fingers. The photographs, the documents. 3 years and 18 months of slowly, carefully dismantled evidence of every crime the Moretti Empire had committed that she could reach. None of it was enough yet. That was the brutal truth of it. She had enough to interest a federal prosecutor. She didn't have enough to guarantee a conviction. Not without the shipping contract files from Vittorio's private records, which she hadn't been able to access. Not without the financial transfers she knew existed but hadn't found. She needed more time, and someone was about to take all of it away from her. The footsteps stopped outside her door. A knock. Hard. 3 impacts, the knock of someone who wasn't actually asking. Sophia zipped the duffel bag, slid it back under the bed, stood, and opened the door. 2 men. The ones from the corridor. Vittorio's security. One was perhaps 40, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had been broken once across the nose and never properly set. The other was younger, thicker, with the incurious eyes of someone who followed instructions rather than gave them. The older one looked at Sophia, then passed her into the room, then back at Sophia. "Security check," he said. "Estate protocol." "Of course," Sophia said. She stepped back and let them in. She stood near the window while they moved through her room with the professional efficiency of people who had done this many times. They checked the closet, the drawers, under the mattress, inside the pillowcases. The gray-haired one's eyes paused on the duffel bag under the bed. He crouched and pulled it out, unzipped it. Inside, a change of clothes, toiletry items, a paperback novel, $40 in cash, and a phone charger. Everything else, the drive, the photographs, the documents, had been in her hands 30 seconds ago and were now tucked inside the hidden lining of her uniform jacket that she'd sewn herself in the 4th month of her employment when she'd first understood what kind of house this was going to be. The gray-haired man looked at the bag's contents. Then he zipped it and slid it back under the bed. He looked at Sophia one more time. "Carry on," he said. They left. Sophia closed the door behind them and stood in the silence of her room, with her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her ears, in her fingertips, in the backs of her knees. She pressed her forehead against the cool surface of the door and breathed. Once, twice, steadied. Her phone vibrated. Not a text this time. A call. Unknown number. Different from last night's, but with the same blocked identifier signature. She answered. Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then a voice she didn't recognize, male, low, careful in the way of someone speaking in a place where they could be overheard. "He knows your name," the voice said. "Not Vale. The other one. Vittorio has it. He got it an hour ago, and he's already made 2 calls to people you don't want him calling." Sophia's free hand found the wall. "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone who knew your father." A pause. "Someone who's been waiting a long time for what you're trying to do." Another pause. "You have tonight, maybe less. Get what you need and get out, or they'll bury you the way they buried him." The line went dead. Sophia stood with the phone pressed against her ear, listening to nothing, while the world she had spent 5 years building cracked down the center under the weight of a single sentence. "He knows your name." She pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at it. Then she looked at the locked door, the narrow window, the duffel bag under the bed, the carefully sewn hidden lining of her jacket. Then she looked at the ceiling and made the decision she had been postponing for 3 years. She was done waiting. Tonight she would go into Vittorio's East Wing office and take everything she hadn't been able to reach yet. Tonight she would finish what she came here to do, 5 years after they put her father in the ground and walked away clean. She would do it alone, without help, without time, inside a house that had just become a trap. And if Damien Moretti got in her way, she didn't finish that thought either. She pulled on her jacket, checked the lining, and opened her door into the corridor. Empty. Vittorio's men had moved on. She could hear them 2 floors below now, the muffled thud of drawers being opened and closed, the particular rhythm of a search that believed it had already found nothing and was finishing out of protocol rather than conviction. That was good. That bought her perhaps 20 minutes before they completed the sweep and reported back. 20 minutes to cross the estate from the servants' wing to the east wing without being seen, bypass whatever security Vittorio kept on his private office, and photograph everything worth photographing before anyone found her missing from her room. She'd done harder things in less time with worse odds. She told herself that as she moved down the corridor in the dark. The estate at night had its own geography, different from the daytime version, different from the gala version. The lights on the upper floors ran on motion sensors outside the family quarters, which meant she had to move slowly through the east-facing hallways, hugging the walls, avoiding the trigger zones she'd spent 3 years memorizing. The security cameras were another map layered on top of the first. 7 cameras in the main corridors, 2 in the East Wing entrance, 1 above Vittorio's office door. She knew the rotation schedule. She knew the 3-second blind spots in the East Wing camera's arc when it reached its rightward limit. She knew all of this because she had made it her business to know it, in the quiet, patient way of someone who understood that preparation was the only weapon available to someone with no other weapons. She reached the East Wing entrance at 9:14. 2 guards at the main corridor junction, 40 feet from the East Wing door. Both of them Vittorio's, not the regular estate security that Sophia had spent years learning, but the personal detail he brought with him, men who answered only to him, men who had never seen Sophia as anything other than background furniture. She watched them from the shadow of the service alcove for 90 seconds. They stood with the particular boredom of professionals on night post. Weight shifted slightly, eyes moving in the habitual scan patterns of their training, conversation low and intermittent, not alert, not expecting anything. She walked out of the shadow and toward them with a linen cart she'd pulled from the housekeeping closet 10 feet back. "Turn down service for the East Wing suite," she said. Her voice had no performance in it. Flat, routine, the voice of someone who had made this walk 100 times. The gray-haired one from her room search, she recognized him now, the broken nose, the set eyes, looked at her, then at the cart, then at his watch. "Turn down was scheduled at 8, he said. "There was a kitchen delay. Mr. Vittorio requested the lavender linens, and we were low. Had to pull from storage." She held his gaze at the exact level of mild professional irritation. Nothing more. "I can come back if he'd prefer to wait, but Ms." She paused as if searching for a name. The household manager specifically said he asked twice. The gray-haired one looked at her for 3 full seconds. Sophia counted them. She could feel the pressure of them against her skin like temperature. He stepped aside. "Suite only," he said. "Office wing is closed." "Of course," Sophia said, and pushed the cart through the east wing door. The suite was first. She had to actually perform the turn-down service, because leaving the cart in the corridor untouched would register wrong if either guard checked. She moved through Vittorio's bedroom with the speed of someone who'd done the work so many times the body ran it independently of the mind. Fresh pillow covers, water glass replaced, curtains drawn, bedside lamp adjusted. 4 minutes, start to finish. Then she pushed the cart out of the suite, left it in the east wing corridor as though she'd forgotten something inside, and turned toward the office wing. The guard had said it was closed. He hadn't said it was locked. It was locked. She'd expected this. She pulled the tension wrench and pick she'd carried for 6 months in the seam of her jacket, small enough to pass through fabric, purchased separately from 3 different sources, and went to work on the deadbolt. She'd practiced on this lock type. 40 seconds of careful manipulation and the cylinder rotated. She was inside in 45. Vittorio's private office was smaller than Damien's, but denser. The difference between a man who ran things operationally and a man who ran things architecturally. Shelves floor to ceiling on 2 walls, not books, but files. Physical files, which told Sophia everything she needed to know about the generation of crime she was dealing with. The desk was mahogany and enormous, the surface almost clear, with a single laptop closed and a desk phone and a leather folder that she went to first. Inside the folder, handwritten notes in Vittorio's precise, archaic script. She photographed them page by page, her phone's shutter silent in the darkness, the glow of the screen the only light. Meeting summaries. Names she recognized: 3 sitting judges, 2 aldermen, a federal port authority supervisor named Greer, who had been in her father's case files 5 years ago. She went to the filing cabinets next. The first 2 were administrative, nothing she didn't already have. The third was locked with a combination, which she could not breach quickly, and she moved past it to the shelves. Third shelf from the bottom, behind a row of legal binders, she found what she had come for. A cardboard file box, unmarked. Inside, manila folders organized by date, the oldest going back 11 years. She pulled the most recent cluster and began photographing, fast but thorough, making sure every page was legible. Shipping manifests with duplicate entries, 2 sets of numbers, one for the regulatory filing, one for the actual cargo. The gap between the 2 numbers was where the money lived. 47 manifests, spread across 9 months, the pattern consistent and damning and exactly what a federal prosecutor would need to demonstrate systematic fraud at the organizational level. Then she found the folder with her father's name on it. She stopped. The folder was thin, 5 pages, maybe 6. On the tab, in Vittorio's handwriting, Valenti, resolution. She opened it. The first page was a memo, dated 5 years and 3 months ago. Internal. Addressed from Vittorio to 2 names she didn't recognize. Operationals, she understood, people hired for a specific category of work. The language was oblique in the way of men who understood that documents could be found. No explicit instructions, no direct language, just a series of phrases that meant nothing in isolation and everything in sequence. The Valenti matter requires resolution before the federal filing timeline advances. The approach should appear consistent with the neighborhood profile. No organizational signature. Her father had been killed on a Tuesday evening in November, walking from his parking garage to his office building. The police report said robbery. His wallet was taken. The neighborhood had seen 2 other incidents that month, both classified as opportunistic street crime. She had always known, with the deep certainty that lived below evidence and above intuition, that it was not random. She had known from the day the first witness recanted, from the day the second witness disappeared, from the day a detective she'd never met before told her the case was going cold, with the particular rehearsed regret of a man delivering a message someone else had written. But knowing and holding the document that proved it were 2 different countries separated by an ocean. Her hands were steady. She noted this with the same detached precision she'd noted her steady hands in the ballroom. The body protecting itself from what the mind was processing by refusing to register the full weight of it. She photographed all 5 pages. She photographed the tab. She photographed the folder number on the spine. Then she put it back exactly where she found it. She was replacing the last file binder on the shelf when the light came on. Not the desk lamp, the overhead, flooding the room. Sophia turned. Vittorio Moretti stood in the doorway. Behind him, the gray-haired guard. Behind the guard, Celeste. And Celeste's face had the expression Sophia had been trying to read since 7 this morning. The one that was finally legible now because the decision it reflected had already been executed. Celeste had told him, not an hour ago, not this afternoon. She had come to Vittorio the moment the gala ended and the household quieted, and she had laid down everything she'd collected, whatever she'd found, however she'd found it, and traded it for whatever she'd wanted in return. Vittorio walked into the office. He moved without urgency, his hands still clasped behind his back, his expression the same neutral occupation of space she'd observed in the corridor. He looked at Sophia, then at the shelving unit behind her, then back at Sophia with the comprehensive calm of a man whose worst possibilities had just been confirmed and who found the confirmation tidier than the uncertainty had been. "Put the phone on the desk," he said. Sophia didn't move. "The phone," he said again, same tone. No escalation. She set it on the desk. He picked it up, looked at the screen, still lit, the last photograph of the shipping manifest visible, and set it face down without looking at it again. "Sophia Valenti," he said, "you look like your father." The words hit her in the sternum like something physical. She absorbed them without showing it, the way she'd been absorbing physical things all night. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "No." He almost smiled. "You're very good. 3 years in my nephew's house, and we never looked twice at you. That's either exceptional skill or exceptional patience." He tilted his head slightly. "I think it's both." Behind him, Celeste stood with her hands folded in front of her, not triumphant, watchful. "What did she tell you?" Sophia asked. She looked at Celeste directly. "Everything she knew," Vittorio said, "which wasn't much. Your real name. A suggestion that you weren't what you appeared to be." He gestured at the shelving unit. "This confirms the rest." Sophia ran the numbers in her head in the space of 2 seconds. The photographs were on her phone, which was now on his desk. The documents in her jacket lining were safe but useless without transmission. She hadn't been able to send them yet, had been waiting until she was out of the building. The encrypted drive in the hidden pocket still held everything she'd accumulated over 3 years, but only she knew where it was. She needed to get out of this room. "I want to call Damien," she said. Something moved across Vittorio's face. Not surprise. A recalibration. "Damien isn't involved in this conversation," he said. "Damien runs this estate. Damien runs what I allow him to run." For the first time, the neutral surface cracked slightly, and what showed through was neither anger nor cruelty, but something more fundamental. Ownership. The expression of a man who had built something from the ground up and watched someone else put his name on it and never once lost sight of whose it actually was. "My nephew has a talent for operations and a weakness for sentiment. I've managed both for 30 years. You're a security problem. Security problems have solutions." He nodded to the gray-haired guard. The guard stepped forward. Sophia moved. Not toward the door. That was what they expected. what the room's geometry suggested, what any panicking person would do. She moved sideways toward the desk and got her hand on the laptop before the guard reached her. She didn't have a plan beyond the next 3 seconds, which was how she'd been operating for the last hour, and the laptop was the only leverage available. "There are copies," she said. The guard stopped. Vittorio's eyes sharpened. "Everything I've photographed tonight, everything I've accumulated for 3 years, there are copies in locations you will never find, addressed to federal contacts that will receive them automatically if I don't check in by a specific time each week." Silence. She was bluffing. She had a dead man switch on the encrypted drive, a protocol she'd set up 8 months ago. But it required her to trigger it manually, and she hadn't had the chance. But Vittorio didn't know that, and the uncertainty of it, she could see, was doing work. "If anything happens to me," she continued, "everything I have goes directly to the DOJ. Every manifest, every name, every payment." She paused. "Including the memo about my father." Vittorio was still. The guard had not moved. Celeste, behind them both, made a small sound. Not a word, barely a breath, but enough. Sophia glanced at her and saw something unexpected in Celeste's face. Not the watchful calculation of 2 minutes ago. Something that looked impossibly like it might be fear on Sophia's behalf. Too late for that. "The memo is ambiguous," Vittorio said. "Careful now. A lawyer could dismantle it in 20 minutes. "Probably," Sophia said, "but the manifests aren't ambiguous, and the names in your notes aren't ambiguous, and the Federal Port Authority supervisor named Greer, who has been quietly cooperating with a separate DOJ investigation for the past 4 months, is definitely not ambiguous." She watched his face. The name Greer landed. Vittorio was too experienced to flinch visibly, but the micro-adjustment in his breathing, the fraction of a second's pause before his next thought, she caught it, cataloged it, understood it. He hadn't known about Greer, which meant there was a leak in his network he hadn't identified yet, and she had just told him she knew about it, which meant she had a contact inside the investigation, which meant she was more connected than a maid with a hidden phone had any right to be. The silence in the office stretched. The gray-haired guard looked at Vittorio. Vittorio looked at Sophia. Outside the window, somewhere on the estate grounds, something moved. A sound that was wrong, too heavy for the wind, too deliberate for an animal. Sophia registered it in the back of her mind and filed it without reaction. "What do you want?" Vittorio asked. "I want to leave this building," Sophia said. "Tonight, with my belongings. And I want the understanding that what I have stays where it is as long as I'm left alone." "You want a truce." "I want to not be buried next to my father." The words came out flat and direct and stripped of everything except what they were, the honest reduction of 5 years to a single sentence. Vittorio considered her. Sophia held the laptop between herself and the gray-haired guard and waited. "Give me the phone," Vittorio said. "No." "The photographs on it are also in 3 other places," she said. "The phone doesn't matter." He looked at her for a very long time, long enough that the guard shifted his weight, long enough that Celeste took a single step backward toward the doorway. "All right," Vittorio said. The guard stepped aside. Sophia walked toward the door, past the guard, past Vittorio. Close enough to him that she could see the pores on his face and the particular flat patience in his eyes. The patience of a man who had made a tactical concession and was already building what came next. She didn't run. Running was the worst thing she could do. She walked with the same controlled cadence she'd used crossing the ballroom floor the night before, measured, deliberate, refusing to perform fear even when fear was the most rational response available. In the doorway she paused, her back to Vittorio. "The memo," she said. "The one about my father. I memorized it, every word." She paused. "I won't forget it." She walked out into the East Wing corridor. She didn't stop at her room. She went straight to the east staircase, down 3 flights, through the basement kitchen, empty, the lights on timers, the industrial clock reading 10:42, and toward the service entrance. She pushed through the door and the cold hit her like a wall. November outside. The estate grounds were dark beyond the perimeter lighting, the garden paths in shadow, the gravel wet from last night's rain. The two investigators she'd clocked earlier were gone. Their shifts ended, or pulled, or something else. The absence of them felt different from the presence of them. She was 30 feet from the service gate when she heard the greenhouse door bang open to her left. Then the first shot. The sound cracked across the estate grounds, sharp and enormous in the outdoor silence, and Sophia was already moving before her conscious mind processed what it was. Diving left, behind a stone garden wall, her cheek hitting the gravel, her palms shredding on the path's surface. The shot had gone wide, high. Warning or bad aim, she didn't know yet. She pressed herself flat against the wall's base and controlled her breathing. Heavy footsteps on gravel, more than one person, coming from the greenhouse, coming from the direction of the east wing external exit. Both approaches covered. She had nothing, no weapon. The phone she'd surrendered was on Vittorio's desk. The encrypted drive was still in her jacket lining and was completely useless to her in the next 60 seconds, because what she needed in the next 60 seconds was to not be shot. She heard the greenhouse door again. Then a voice. Not Vittorio's security, someone else, someone whose voice she didn't recognize, barking directional commands in the clipped shorthand of a tactical team. Not investigators, not Vittorio's personal detail. Something else had arrived, something planned. She pressed lower and moved along the base of the wall toward the north garden's perimeter, toward the gap in the hedgerow she'd found by accident in her first year and never reported. A gap that led to the estate's secondary access road, the one the gardening contractors used, which connected to the public street 400 meters north. Behind her, the footsteps converged on the spot where she'd been. A flashlight beam swept the gravel where she'd dived, caught the blood from her shredded palms. Then a voice she knew. Find her! Vittorio! The truce had lasted 11 minutes. She ran. The hedgerow gap was 20 feet from the north wall. She covered it in darkness, low and fast, her uniform jacket catching on the hedge branches as she pushed through, the gap narrower than she remembered. Or she was shaking harder than she realized because it took 2 full seconds of forcing herself through the gap instead of the one she'd planned on. Out the other side, onto the grass strip beside the contractor road. She ran north along the road's edge, in the shadow of the tree line, her feet finding the ground by feel because looking down in the dark was how you went down, and going down right now was how you didn't get back up. Behind her, shouting, a flashlight beam swinging through the hedgerow gap, then headlights, coming from the north, coming fast. A black vehicle on the contractor road, closing the distance between them at a speed that wasn't cautious or measured, a speed that meant whoever was driving knew exactly where they were going and had decided that arriving mattered more than anything else. Sophia stopped. Nowhere left to run. The tree line on one side, the open road on the other, the estate behind her, the vehicle in front. She stood in the headlights with her arms at her sides and her chin up and her palms bleeding onto the grass, and she looked directly into the lights because she was done turning away from things. The vehicle stopped 10 feet from her. The driver's door opened. Damien Moretti stepped into the headlights. He looked at her face, at the gravel burn on her cheek, the blood on her hands, the state of her uniform. And something happened in his expression that went through several things rapidly before settling into the one she'd never seen on him before. Not anger, not assessment, not the predatory curiosity from the ballroom. Something that looked like it had been running very fast for a very long time and had just found what it was running toward. Get in the car, he said. Your uncle just tried to kill me, Sophia said. I know. Then you know I have no reason to get into a car with a Moretti. Damien took 2 steps toward her. Behind her, the flashlight beams were getting closer, the shouting in the estate grounds louder. Sophia. Her name in his voice. Not theatrical now, not loaded, stripped of everything. I know who you are. The cold moved through her again. Different from the text messages cold, different from the office's cold. This was the cold of the ground shifting beneath her feet in a way that could not be undone. Then you know why I'm here, she said. Yes. He held her gaze without moving. And I know what my uncle did to your father. The words cracked something open in her chest that she had kept sealed for 5 years with sheer force of will, and she felt it go. Felt the crack run from her sternum upward. Felt the thing she'd built to survive begin to... She felt the crack run from her sternum upward, felt the thing she'd built to survive begin to fracture under the weight of those 6 words. I know what my uncle did. And she made the choice in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She got in the car. Damien was behind the wheel before she'd closed the door, the vehicle already moving, gravel spraying under the tires as he accelerated north along the contractor road. In the side mirror, Sophia watched the flashlight beams reach the hedgerow gap, watched them swing uselessly across the empty grass strip where she'd been standing, watched them diminish as the distance grew. Nobody followed. Not immediately. The contractor road connected to the public street without a gate, an oversight in the estate security design that Damien had clearly known about and that Vittorio's men apparently hadn't been briefed on. She sat in the passenger seat with her bleeding palms flat on her thighs and her chest doing something she couldn't fully control. Not crying, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same neighborhood as crying and kept threatening to move in. She locked it down with the same mechanism she'd been using for 5 years and stared out the windshield at the suburban street sliding past. Damien drove without speaking for 4 minutes. He turned south onto a larger road, then west onto a highway on-ramp, merging into thin late-night traffic with the focused economy of someone who'd driven away from bad situations before. Then he said, "How bad are your hands?" She looked at them. Gravel rash across both palms, bleeding in spots but not deep. The kind of damage that stung viciously and looked worse than it was. "Fine," she said. "There's a kit under the seat." She reached under and found a hard-shell first aid case. She opened it on her lap and started cleaning her palms with antiseptic wipes, the sting sharp enough to focus her mind back to immediate things, away from the fracture line running through her chest. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Your real name?" "Since about 9 this evening." He kept his eyes on the road. Renner flagged it. Cross-referenced old federal case records against the gap in your employment history. Valenti isn't an uncommon name, but a prosecutor's daughter who disappeared right after his murder. He stopped. It narrowed. "And before tonight?" "I knew something was wrong with your file. I told you that this morning." He paused. "I didn't know the shape of it." Sophia pressed a gauze pad against her left palm and held it. Outside, the city's industrial periphery slid past. Warehouses, freight yards, the dark geometries of the port district rising against the orange night sky. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere Vittorio doesn't have sight lines." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." He glanced at her once, quickly, then back to the road. "I got a call 40 minutes ago. One of my people inside the estate, not Vittorio's mine, told me men were mobilizing on the grounds, armed." His jaw tightened. "I was 20 minutes out." 11 minutes, Sophia said. "What?" "The truce lasted 11 minutes, from the time I walked out of his office to the first shot." Damien's hand tightened on the wheel. Not rage, something colder than rage, the compression of a man who had just had something he believed confirmed in the worst possible way. "He agreed to let you go," Damien said. "He said he did." "And then he sent men after you." "Yes." The highway curved south toward the lake. Damien took an exit she didn't recognize, dropped into a street grid of converted industrial buildings, and pulled into an underground garage beneath a structure that had once been a meatpacking facility and was now, by the look of its upper floors through the windshield, something else entirely. He killed the engine. In the sudden silence, Sophia became aware of how loud her own breathing had been. She regulated it deliberately, 2 slow cycles, and the pressure in her chest reduced to something manageable. "Get out," Damien said. Not harshly, just moving. She got out. The building's interior had been gutted and rebuilt as something between a safe house and a functional living space. Exposed brick, high ceilings, industrial light fixtures throwing warm pools across concrete floors. A kitchen along one wall, functional rather than decorative. A long table surrounded by mismatched chairs. 3 closed doors off the main room. The kind of space maintained rather than inhabited. Everything clean and stocked and ready for use by someone who needed it suddenly. 2 men were already inside. She didn't recognize either of them, but she read them. Mid-30s, hard in the particular way of men who'd done field work, not office work. They looked at Sophia with the neutral assessment of people accustomed to unexpected arrivals. One of them had a phone against his ear that he lowered when Damien walked in. "Perimeter?" Damien asked. "Clean," the man said. "No tail." "Keep checking." Damien shrugged off his jacket, threw it over a chair, and turned to Sophia. "Sit down." "I'll stand." He looked at her for a beat. Then he pulled out a chair and sat himself, forearms on the table, and looked up at her with an expression that had dropped every layer of performance she'd ever seen on his face. What was left was starker, harder, more honest than anything she'd seen from him. "Tell me what you have, he said. "Tell me what you know first." "Sophia?" "No." She put both hands flat on the table and leaned in. Her palms screamed. She ignored them. "You drove up in the dark 10 seconds before your uncle's men reached me. You knew where I was. You knew which road. Either you've been tracking me for the past 24 hours, or someone inside that estate gave you coordinates. And either way, I need to understand what side of this you're standing on before I tell you anything." The two men near the wall had gone very still. Damien held her gaze. His face was doing the thing again. That internal weather, things moving through it that she'd been trying to read since the ballroom and still couldn't fully translate. "I'm standing on the side that didn't just try to shoot you," he said. "That's a low bar." "Yeah." Something almost rueful crossed his face. "It is," he exhaled. "My man inside the estate is a woman, actually. Part of the household security rotation. She's been with me for 4 years, not Vittorio. When his men started moving with weapons, she called me." He paused. "I knew your general location because the estate has GPS pings on all service vehicles. I remembered you'd done laundry runs to the external facility and knew the contractor road was your most likely exit. You guessed. I made an educated guess at speed. It worked." He spread his hands slightly. "I'm not tracking you. I didn't know who you were until 9 o'clock tonight. And what I knew at 9 o'clock didn't include—" He gestured at her hands, her face, the general state of her. "This." Sophia straightened. Her palms throbbed. Her cheek where the gravel had caught her was starting to stiffen. She was running on adrenaline and the particular fuel of a plan in collapse, and she could feel both burning down toward empty. She pulled out a chair and sat. "I have shipping manifests," she said. 47, spanning 9 months, showing systematic dual-ledger fraud in cargo declarations. I have meeting notes in Vittorio's handwriting with the names of 3 judges, 2 aldermen, and a federal port authority official. I have a record of financial transfers I photographed 8 months ago from administrative files that connect shell companies to the legitimate shipping operation. She paused. "And I have a memo. Internal, dated 5 years ago. Authorizing the word stuck for 1 second, and she pushed it through, the resolution of my father's case." The room was completely silent. Damien sat very still. "In his handwriting?" he asked. "His signature." Damien closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, they had a different quality. Not softer, but deeper. Like someone had moved something out of the way, and what was behind it was something he'd been not looking at for a long time. "How much of this did you transmit?" he asked. "The manifests and meeting notes. I photographed them tonight in his office. They're on my phone, which is currently on Vittorio's desk." She watched Damien's jaw tighten. "But I've been photographing and transmitting documents for 18 months. Everything I had before tonight is already off the estate." "Where?" "Encrypted cloud, dead man's switch protocol. If I don't access it within 7 days, it auto-transmits to 3 federal contacts." She paused. "I haven't told you who those contacts are, and I'm not going to." He looked at her for a long time. "That's smart," he said quietly. "Your uncle murdered my father," Sophia said. "Smart is how I'm still alive." The words sat between them. The 2 men near the wall had found reasons to look at other things. The floor, the ceiling, their phones. The statement had a weight that changed the atmosphere of the room, and everyone in it understood that and gave it its space. Damien stood. He walked to the kitchen area, filled a glass with water, set it in front of her. Then he stood with his back against the counter and looked at her with an expression she had no category for. "I didn't know," he said. "About your father." "I know you didn't." "How?" "Because you're useful to him," Sophia said. You run the operation. You have relationships with the regulators, the port officials, the politicians Vittorio cultivated. Vittorio uses you the way he uses everything, as infrastructure. He wouldn't have told you about something that happened before you were fully embedded unless he needed to. She paused. And he didn't need to. I've been running this organization for 6 years, Damien said. The things I've authorized, the people I've... He stopped. His hand was flat on the counter, and the pressure of it had gone white at the knuckles. I know, Sophia said. You know. I've been living in your house for 3 years. I've cleaned up after your meetings. She stopped herself. I know what kind of operation you run. I know what you are. Then why are you still in this car? Because you're not who ordered my father killed, and because right now you're the only thing standing between me and the men your uncle sent. She looked at him squarely. And because I need what I photographed in that office tonight, and it's on a phone on Vittorio's desk. Damien said nothing for a moment. What you have without those photographs, he said slowly. Is it enough? For a federal investigation, probably. For a conviction, maybe. For Vittorio specifically. She shook her head. The memo is the key. Without it, I can damage the organization, but he walks away. He's insulated. He always has been. She paused. He spent 40 years building distance between himself and every decision. The memo is the only thing I've ever found with his name on the wrong side. Damien turned away from her and walked toward the far wall. He stood there for a long moment with his back to the room, and Sophia watched the tension move through his shoulders and spine with the particular violence of a man processing something that was reorganizing his entire understanding of his own life. She understood that feeling. He turned around. I can get the phone, he said. Vittorio's office has 2 of his personal security on it now, possibly more by morning. I know where his security vulnerabilities are. I built half of them. His voice had changed. The raw honesty was still there, but something harder had moved in underneath it. The operational intelligence that ran him when everything else burned away. I need 4 hours, and I need you to stay here. I'm not staying here. Sophia, if you go into that estate and something goes wrong, I have nothing. No phone, no memo, no way to prove anything about my father. She held his gaze. I'm coming. He looked at her for a long time with an expression that was not quite resignation and not quite respect, and lived somewhere in between. Then he turned to the 2 men by the wall. Get the car ready. They moved at 1 a.m. Damien had changed into dark clothes. Sophia had found a black jacket in a closet near the main room's back wall. One of the 2 men's, she thought, too broad across the shoulders, but dark, and her jacket was in ruins. She changed the bandaging on her palms, tighter this time, and flexed her fingers until the pain settled into something workable. The drive back to the estate took 16 minutes. Nobody spoke. Damien parked on the public street 2 blocks north of the estate's main entrance, and they walked the remaining distance through a residential street running parallel to the estate's west wall. He moved with the specific economy of a man who knew exactly where every camera was. Because of course he did. He had designed the security architecture himself, 3 years before Sophia arrived. He found a section of wall where the camera rotation left a 12-second gap. He went over first, landed in a crouch, turned immediately, and offered his hand. Sophia was already coming over without it, dropped beside him, absorbed the impact through her legs. He looked at her with something that might have been approval and said nothing. The west grounds were dark. The gala infrastructure had been fully dismantled during the day, the chairs and marquees and lighting rigs gone. The grounds returned to their nighttime state. Shaped hedgerows, gravel paths, the east wing's lit windows throwing rectangular patches of gold onto the lawn. They moved across the grass in the dark, low and fast, staying off the gravel. Damien led with the certainty of someone navigating by memory in a place they'd walked 1,000 times, taking routes Sophia hadn't known existed. A service passage along the west garden wall that brought them out 20 feet from the east wing's secondary entrance. A maintenance door that Damien opened with a key code she watched him punch in and immediately committed to memory. Inside. The east wing's service corridor, dim, motion sensor lit, the ceiling fixtures triggering as they moved. They had made it 12 feet when the door at the end of the corridor opened and the gray-haired guard stepped through. He saw them. His hand went to his hip, and Damien was already moving. 3 fast steps and a strike to the inside of the man's wrist that sent the weapon skittering across the concrete floor, then a second strike, precise and economical, that put the guard against the wall with Damien's forearm across his throat. "How many in the office wing?" Damien asked. The guard said nothing. Damien increased the pressure. The guard's face went from red to purple to cooperation. 2, he managed. "Vittorio? He's sweet. He's expecting—" "I know what he's expecting." Damien stepped back and hit him once more, clean and efficient, and the man went down slowly against the wall and stayed there. Sophia retrieved the weapon from the floor. A compact 9mm, safety on. She checked the chamber, loaded, and held it with both hands the way she'd taught herself from a manual in the 3rd month of her employment. In the small hours of the morning in her room, when she'd understood that preparation wasn't paranoia in this house, it was arithmetic. Damien looked at the gun in her hands. He said nothing about it. They moved. The office wing was 40 feet down a connecting corridor. 1 guard outside Vittorio's office. They heard him before they saw him, the shuffle of someone standing post who'd been standing post for too many hours and was fighting the drag of boredom. Damien dealt with him the same way, faster this time, and Sophia caught the second weapon and tucked it into her waistband. The office door. Damien tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back and looked at Sophia. "You picked this earlier," he said. "Yes," he gestured. She went to work on the lock, the tension wrench and pick from her jacket lining, her hands steadier than they had any right to be given everything that had happened in the preceding 4 hours. 40 seconds. The cylinder rotated. Inside. The overhead still on from earlier, the room exactly as she'd left it. Shelving unit, desk, leather folder, the closed laptop. She went straight to the desk. The phone was gone. She checked the desk surface, the drawer, the floor around the desk. Gone. Vittorio had moved it. Of course he'd moved it. "He has it," she said. Damien was already at the door. "East Suite." "Damien." She caught his arm. "He'll have his remaining security in there with him." "Probably." "Then we need—" The East Suite door opened at the end of the corridor. Vittorio stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, no jacket, and he looked at Damien with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting for a betrayal he knew was coming and finds that it still hurts. Behind him, the second security man, not gray hair, a different one, younger and wider, with his weapon already drawn. The 4 of them stood in the corridor in a geometry of mutual threat, and nobody moved for 3 full seconds that felt much longer. "Damien," Vittorio said. His voice was exactly the same as it had been in the office 2 hours ago. Neutral, inhabited, occupying the space completely. "You're making a mistake." "I've been making them my whole life," Damien said. "Most of them were yours." Something crossed Vittorio's face. Pain, maybe. The kind that lived so deep in a person it only surfaced under specific pressures and immediately got locked back down. "She's using you," Vittorio said. "Whatever she told you." "She told me about Marco Valenti." The name stopped everything. Vittorio went very still. Sophia watched his face and saw something she had not expected to see in it. Not just the tactical recalculation of a man whose leverage had shifted, but something older than that, something that preceded strategy. Something that looked like the specific exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a particular weight for a long time and has just been told he can no longer pretend it isn't there. "That was necessary," Vittorio said. His voice had changed, quieter, stripped of the neutral authority. Valenti had enough to take down the entire organization. Every operation, every official, He was a federal prosecutor, Damien said. He was doing his job. His job was going to put your father's name on a conviction, Damien. Your father, my brother, everything we built. My father's been dead for 9 years. His name doesn't matter more than a man's life. Damien's voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, the seam showing through the hardness. It doesn't matter more than her father's life. The young security man still had his weapon trained on Damien. Damien's attention stayed on Vittorio. Sophia stood 2 feet to Damien's left with the 9mm at her side. her finger outside the trigger guard, her eyes on the security man's hand. "Give me the phone," Sophia said. Vittorio looked at her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the office. The comprehensive assessment, the calculation running behind the neutral eyes. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and held up the phone between two fingers. "This." He turned it in the light. "This is everything. Without this, you have enough to inconvenience us. With this, you have enough to bury us." "Yes," Sophia said. "And you'd take us all down, not just me, Damien. The operations he's authorized, the corruption you built and made him run," Sophia said. "Yes." Vittorio looked at Damien. "This is what she wants," Vittorio said. "Not justice, destruction. She came into this house to burn it down with all of us inside it." "Maybe that's what we deserve," Damien said. Vittorio's eyes moved between them. Sophia watched him read the geometry of the situation, her weapon at her side, Damien unarmed, the young security man with his gun on Damien, the corridor with its one exit behind Sophia. She watched him calculate. She'd seen him calculate before, in the office, and she understood that Vittorio Moretti was one of those minds that ran 3 moves ahead of every conversation, and right now it was running, and she needed to stay ahead of what it landed on. She raised the 9mm and pointed it at the security man. "Tell him to put it down," she said to Vittorio. "You won't shoot anyone," Vittorio said. "I've been inside your house for 3 years," Sophia said. "I've cleaned up what happens in the rooms you lock. I watched what this organization does to people who can't fight back." Her voice was level. Her hands were level. The pain in her palms was distant and irrelevant. "Don't tell me what I'll do." The security man looked at Vittorio. Vittorio looked at Sophia. And then everything happened in the space of 3 seconds. The security man's weapon shifted. Not toward Sophia, a micro shift toward the trigger, the muscle preparation that preceded a decision. And Sophia registered it and moved, stepping left and pulling Damien with her hand on his shoulder as the shot went off, the sound enormous in the enclosed corridor, the round punching through the wall where Damien's chest had been. The return shot came from Damien. She hadn't seen him take the second weapon from her waistband, had felt it leave and processed it as he raised it in one smooth motion and put a round into the security man's shoulder. The man went back against the wall and down, his weapon clattering on the concrete, his arm useless, and his voice going in the wordless register of serious pain. Vittorio had not moved. He stood in the doorway of his suite with the phone still between 2 fingers and his eyes on Damien and an expression that had finally, completely, dropped every layer. What was underneath was raw and complicated and old. The face of a man looking at a nephew he had built from the ground up and finding that the thing he'd built had just turned itself against him. Damien walked toward him, 5 steps. He stopped 1 foot from Vittorio. "Give me the phone," he said. Vittorio looked at him for a long time. "You understand what you're doing," Vittorio said. Not a question. "Yes. You're ending everything, not just me, you, everything you've built, everything you are." "I know what I am," Damien said. "You made sure of that." He took the phone from Vittorio's hand. Vittorio let it go. He let it go like a man releasing something he'd been holding for so long. The releasing was its own kind of violence, a surrender that took more out of him than resistance would have. He stood in the doorway of his suite and watched Damien walk back toward Sophia, and his face had the specific stillness of a man standing at the end of a very long road and finding it was a cliff edge after all. Damien held the phone out to Sophia. She took it, checked the screen, locked, but intact, the photograph still in the camera roll visible from the lock screen preview. Everything there. She looked up at Damien. His face was doing many things at once. The controlled rage beneath the surface, the operational precision that had gotten them through the corridor, and underneath both of those, the things she'd glimpsed in the library the night before, the raw openness of a man encountering something he could no longer close himself against. "We need to move," Sophia said. "His people will have heard the shot." "I know." Damien didn't move yet. He looked at her with that expression. When this is over, Sophia said, "there may not be a you and me to have this conversation." "I know that too." From behind them, from the direction of the main estate, she heard the sounds of rapid movement, feet on stairs, raised voices, The organized mobilization of Vittorio's remaining men responding to the gunshot. From outside, through the walls, she heard something else. Something that cut through the building noise and her own heartbeat and registered in her mind as wrong before she identified what it was. Vehicles. Multiple. Moving fast on the service road, not Vittorio's. She moved to the corridor window and looked out. 4 black SUVs were pulling through the estate's main gate with the particular coordinated movement of a tactical approach. No sirens, no lights, but the geometry of it unmistakable. Agents in vests moving fast across the grounds toward the estate's main entrance. The federal contacts. The dead man's switch. But she hadn't triggered it. 7 days, she'd told Damien. She hadn't missed a check-in. The protocol hadn't activated. She turned from the window and found Damien watching her. "How?" she asked. Damien's jaw was tight. "I made a call," he said. 2 hours ago, before I came to get you." He held her eyes. "I knew what was in that office. I knew what it meant. I knew that if something went wrong tonight..." He stopped. "I made a call." Sophia looked at him. The sounds from inside the building were getting louder. The sounds from outside were organized and closing fast. In approximately 90 seconds, this corridor was going to be the center of a convergence that would end everything. Vittorio's organization, Damien's operation, 3 years of Sophia's careful architecture, and quite possibly both of their freedoms, because federal agents arriving at a scene with 2 people holding weapons and a man bleeding on the floor did not make distinctions based on whose side you thought you were. Sophia put the gun on the floor. She did it slowly, deliberately, crouching and setting it down with both hands visible, the way she'd read to do it in a manual that felt like a lifetime ago. Then she stood and looked at Damien. "Put yours down," she said. "Sophia, if they come in here and we're holding weapons over a man with a gunshot wound, nothing else matters. Not the phone, not the manifests, not any of it." She held his eyes. "Put it down." Damien looked at her for 1 second. Then he crouched and placed his weapon on the floor beside hers. Vittorio had not moved from the doorway of his suite. He stood watching them with the expression of a man observing events that had passed beyond his ability to alter. Not defeated exactly, but arrived. Like he had been traveling toward this corridor for a very long time without knowing it and had just recognized the destination. The young security man was sitting against the wall with his good hand pressed to his shoulder, his face the gray-white of controlled shock, his breathing loud and uneven in the corridor silence. He was looking at nobody, just looking at the middle distance with the focused concentration of someone managing serious pain 1 second at a time. The sounds from outside had resolved into something structured, orders being called, entry points being covered, the particular organized language of a federal operation that knew what it was walking into. She heard them on the estate's main level. She heard them on the stairs. Sophia picked up the phone from where she'd been holding it and walked to the corridor wall. She sat down with her back against it, her knees drawn up, and began transmitting. The encrypted cloud address, 47 manifests, meeting notes, transfer records, the memo with Vittorio's signature and her father's name on the tab. She sent everything in one compressed transfer, watching the progress bar move with the excruciating slowness of a large file on a degraded signal, and she watched the corridor door and the stairwell door simultaneously while it moved. 60%. 70. The stairwell door opened. 4 agents in vests with weapons raised, the lead one calling the room with the precise verbal shorthand of tactical entry. "Hands, hands, don't move, show me your hands." And Sophia raised both hands with the phone still transmitting in her right and watched the progress bar in her peripheral vision while an agent covered her and another moved to the weapons on the floor and another crossed to the man bleeding against the wall. 85%. "Phone," the lead agent said. "Set it down." 30 seconds, Sophia said. "Now, Ben, 30 seconds and I'll give you everything on it plus everything it just sent to a federal cloud address." She looked at the agent directly. Her voice was steady. "My name is Sophia Valenti. My father was Marcus Valenti, federal prosecutor, Cook County District, murdered 5 years ago in what was staged as a robbery. The man standing in that doorway authorized it. I have the document." She paused. 20 seconds. The lead agent looked at her, then at Vittorio in the doorway, then back at her. He didn't take the phone. 95. 98. 100. Transfer complete. Sophia set the phone on the floor. The next 4 hours were the kind that existed outside normal time. The bureaucratic aftermath of violence. All fluorescent lighting and form numbers and people asking the same questions in slightly different sequences to see if the answers changed. They took Sophia to a federal building downtown in a separate vehicle from Damien, which she'd expected, and put her in a room with 2 agents and a recording device and a cup of coffee that she didn't touch until it was cold. She told them everything, not because she had to. She understood her legal position well enough to know she had options, angles, ways to bargain. But she had spent 5 years carrying this, and the weight of it had compounded interest the way debt does. And sitting in that room with the recording device running and the agents across the table, she found that the telling of it was its own kind of physical relief. Like setting down something you'd been holding so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. She told them about her father, about the investigation he'd been building, about the witnesses who recanted and disappeared, about the detective who delivered the cold case news with rehearsed regret, about the decision she'd made in a Columbus apartment with nothing left and nowhere to go, to build herself a new name, a new history, and walk into the center of the thing that had destroyed her family and take it apart from the inside. She told them about the 3 years in the estate, the photographs, the manifests, the names in Vittorio's notes, the Port Authority supervisor Greer, who had apparently been cooperating with a separate DOJ investigation for months without anyone on Vittorio's side knowing, a fact that had detonated in Vittorio's face in that office corridor and that Sophia had filed away with satisfaction. She told them about the memo. The Valenti matter requires resolution. 5 words that had cost her father his life and had cost her everything that came after. The agents listened with the particular quality of people taking in information they had been waiting for from a source they hadn't expected. One of them, a woman in her 40s named Reyes, with the patient eyes of someone who'd done this for a long time, asked most of the questions. The other took notes. At one point, Reyes looked up from her legal pad and said, "You understand that some of what you did in that building tonight was illegal," Sophia said. "Yes. Breaking and entering, unauthorized access to private records. You were in possession of a firearm that I put on the floor when you arrived." Sophia looked at her steadily. "I know what I did, and I know what it costs. I'm not asking for anything except that what I gave you is enough to do what my father couldn't finish." Reyes looked at her for a moment. "It's enough," she said quietly. "It's more than enough." Sophia looked at the cold coffee. Then she picked it up and drank it anyway. They released her at 5:40 in the morning. The sky outside the federal building was the specific dark blue of very early morning, just before the first gray edges of light began, and the air was cold enough to pull sharp into the lungs. Sophia stood on the building's front steps with a plastic bag containing the items they'd returned to her, the encrypted drive from her jacket lining, her keys, some cash, and breathed. The city was almost quiet. A delivery truck rumbled past on the street below. Somewhere distant, a train moved along elevated tracks, its sound Dopplering in and out. Chicago in the hour before dawn, and Sophia stood in the middle of it and felt not good, not relieved, not victorious, just present, aware of being alive in a way that had more texture to it than it had had yesterday. She heard the door open behind her. She knew who it was before she turned. She recognized his footsteps, had learned them over 3 years of listening to who was on which floor of the estate, what direction someone was moving, what the rhythm of their step meant about their mood. Damien's step was always controlled, always deliberate, always carrying that particular weight of someone who had been taught that how you moved through a space communicated authority. He stood beside her on the steps and looked out at the street. They stood in silence for a while. "Vittorio?" she asked. "In custody." A pause. "They're holding him without bail. The prosecutor who signed the order..." Another pause, shorter, tighter, cited flight risk and the severity of the federal charges. "The names in his notes," Sophia said. "The judges. The aldermen. They'll get there." Damien's voice was careful, like a man walking on ground he hasn't tested yet. "Reyes told me the manifests alone are enough to run parallel investigations on 7 individuals. The memo?" He stopped. The memo is the keystone, Sophia said. Yes. The delivery truck had gone. The street was empty. Somewhere above them, a window lit up. Someone's alarm going off. The ordinary machinery of a morning beginning. What did they tell you? Sophia asked. About your exposure. Damien was quiet for long enough that she turned to look at him. His face in the pre-dawn light had a quality she hadn't seen before. Stripped, tired, honest in the way that exhaustion makes things honest by removing the energy required for anything else. I cooperated fully, he said. I made the call before I came for you. I gave them everything I had. My own records, the operations I ran, the officials I paid. He paused. All of it. That doesn't answer the question. No, he exhaled. They're negotiating terms. My attorney thinks... He stopped again. The stopping had a pattern to it, she realized. The pauses of a man choosing his words with the care of someone who has just learned that words have direct material consequences. There will be charges. I authorize things. I ran things. I can't undo that by making a phone call at the right moment. No, Sophia said. You can't. I know. He looked at her directly. I'm not asking you to... He stopped. I'm not asking for anything. She looked at his face. The jaw she'd read as arrogant in the ballroom and dangerous in the library and desperate in the corridor was just a face right now. A tired face. A face that belonged to a man who had been built by a system he hadn't chosen and had operated inside it for long enough that the boundary between himself and the system had blurred, and who was now standing on the steps of a federal building at 5 a.m, reckoning with the cost of that in real time. She thought about the ballroom, the champagne glass lifted from her tray, the theatrical question delivered to a room full of people designed to make her small, the laughter. She thought about all the things that had happened between that moment and this one. You humiliated me, she said, not with heat, just as a fact, the way she'd stated her mother's death at the dinner table, clearly without performance. I know. In front of 300 people, because you could. Because I was there, and you were bored, and power is easy to use when the person you're using it on can't fight back. Yes. He didn't deflect it or soften it or offer context, just took it flat, the way it was delivered. And then you came back, Sophia said. When it mattered. You put your weapon down. You called the people who could end it. She paused. I'm trying to figure out what to do with both of those things being true about the same person. Damien looked at her. Something moved through his face that she'd been trying to name for days and was finally naming now, standing here in the cold morning with nothing left to manage or perform or protect. I don't know what you do with it, he said. I don't know what I do with it either. A long silence. The first gray edge of dawn was showing above the buildings to the east. Barely, just the suggestion of it, the sky beginning to remember what it was supposed to become. Where will you go? He asked. Sophia thought about that. She had a Columbus address that was a mail forwarding service. She had an encrypted cloud and a dead man's switch and a name she'd legally changed 4 years ago that she'd been living inside like a temporary shelter. She had $40 in the plastic bag from the federal building and the clothes on her back and the knowledge, settling into her slowly the way cold water settles into a room, that the thing she'd built her entire existence around for 5 years was finished. Not failed. Finished. There was a difference, and she was only now beginning to understand the weight of it. I don't know yet, she said. You could... Damien started, then stopped himself. Don't, Sophia said. Not unkindly. He nodded. She picked up the plastic bag and started down the steps toward the street. At the bottom, she paused. Your operation, she said. The legitimate side of it. The shipping routes, the port relationships, the infrastructure you built. She paused. Most of that is salvageable. The corruption is the thing that ends. The business doesn't have to. He looked at her from the steps. That's... Why are you telling me that? Because my father spent his career trying to cut corruption out of legitimate industries without destroying the industries. She looked at him steadily. He believed they were separable, that the rot wasn't structural, it was a choice that people made, which meant it was a choice that could be unmade. A long pause. He sounds like someone worth knowing, Damien said quietly. He was. She walked down to the street. 6 months moved the way time moves after a storm, slowly at first, while you're still assessing damage, and then in lurches as you discover what's salvageable and what isn't, and begin the work of reconstruction with what remains. Vittorio Moretti was indicted on 23 federal counts, including racketeering, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. The trial was set for 14 months out. 3 of the 5 named officials in his meeting notes had already entered plea agreements. The Port Authority supervisor Greer, who had been quietly cooperating with the DOJ for months before that night, turned out to be the thread that pulled everything. His testimony, combined with Sophia's documentation, created a case that federal prosecutors described in a press briefing that Sophia watched on a laptop in a rented apartment in the Logan Square neighborhood, as among the most comprehensive they had assembled against a Chicago organized crime figure in 20 years. Damien's situation was more complicated, which she had known it would be. He was charged on 4 counts, 2 related to bribery of public officials, 2 to obstruction of an earlier federal investigation. His attorney negotiated extensively. The cooperation agreement he'd entered the night of the arrest, the completeness of the records he'd surrendered, and his direct role in facilitating the takedown of his uncle's network all factored into the final terms. He was sentenced to 18 months at a federal correctional facility with eligibility for early release. He entered custody on a Tuesday in March without press coverage, which his attorney had arranged, and which felt to Sophia, when she heard about it through the federal case updates she still received from Reyes, like the right ending to that particular chapter of his story. Celeste Laurent had left Chicago the morning after the night everything collapsed. Sophia found this out 3 months later, incidentally, through a magazine feature about European social seasons that mentioned her name in a Paris context. She felt nothing about it that she could identify, which seemed like the correct amount. Maria, the head of kitchen staff at the estate, was interviewed by federal investigators in the first week and cleared of all involvement. The estate itself was frozen as a federal asset pending resolution of the case. Sophia heard that Maria had found a position at a hotel downtown within a month. This made her glad in a quiet, uncomplicated way. Sophia's own legal situation had required 4 weeks of negotiation and a very good attorney, paid for by a victim compensation fund she'd qualified for through the reopened investigation into her father's murder. The charges that could have been brought against her, the ones Agent Reyes had begun listing in the interview room, were ultimately declined in exchange for her testimony and the evidence she'd accumulated. Prosecutorial discretion, her attorney called it. Sophia called it math, Ace. She was worth more to them intact than charged. She testified twice, once in a grand jury proceeding, once in a deposition that lasted 11 hours across 2 days, in a conference room with 6 attorneys present and a court reporter who typed without expression through descriptions of things that had happened in that estate that Sophia had carried in silence for 3 years. The second day of the deposition, in the late afternoon, the lead federal prosecutor asked her to describe the moment she'd found the memo in Vittorio's files. Sophia looked at the table for a moment. Then she described it with the same precise flatness she'd brought to everything, the physical details, the tab with her father's name, the 5 pages, the date, the oblique language that meant everything. She watched the attorneys write and the reporter type, and she felt the distance between the event and the telling of it, the strange archaeology of excavating something that had been buried inside her so long its absence felt like a new kind of wound. When she finished, the room was quiet. The prosecutor looked at his notes and then at Sophia and said, "Thank you, Ms. Valenti." She registered her name, her actual name, the one she'd been born into, the one she'd spent 4 years hiding, and felt something settle in her chest. Not healed, not closed, just recognized. The way a scar feels different from a wound, still there, still marking the place where something happened, but no longer bleeding. The restored Moretti Ballroom was used 6 months after the arrest for a federal asset auction. The estate inventory cataloged and sold to cover restitution costs. Sophia read about it in a brief news item. She did not attend. What she attended, on a cold Saturday in late April, was a different kind of gathering, a small ceremony at the Cook County Courthouse where the official reopening of her father's homicide investigation was formally acknowledged. The original robbery classification overturned, and the case status changed to reflect the pending charges against Vittorio Moretti. There were 8 people in the room: Sofia, her attorney, 2 federal agents including Reyes, 2 journalists who'd been covering the case, a courthouse administrator, and a clerk. No family. There was no one left. Her father had been an only child. Her mother had died when Sofia was 19. She had cousins she hadn't spoken to in years in a city she'd left so completely she'd forgotten the street names. The clerk read the official language of the reclassification in the flat bureaucratic cadence of someone reading a utility invoice. The administrator signed 2 documents. Reyes shook Sofia's hand. It took 11 minutes. Sofia stood outside the courthouse afterward in the April cold, her breath visible in the air, and looked at the street. Traffic moved. People passed on the sidewalk with their heads down against the wind. The ordinary city proceeding at its ordinary pace, indifferent to the 11 minutes that had just happened inside that room. She thought about what she'd expected to feel. She'd thought about this moment for 5 years. The official acknowledgement, the reclassification, the bureaucratic confirmation that what she had always known was true. She thought it would feel like something large and definitive, like the closing of a door. It felt like standing outside a courthouse in April with the wind coming off the lake. It felt like the beginning of a Tuesday. She started walking. Reyes caught up with her at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "There's something I need to tell you," Reyes said. She fell into step beside Sofia without breaking the other woman's pace. "About your father's case. Before the reclassification became official, we went back through the original investigation. The detective who delivered the cold case notification to you, the one you described as reading from a script." "Harmon," Sofia said. The name had lived in her memory for 5 years with the specific texture of something that had never stopped feeling wrong. "He retired 18 months after your father's case went cold. Moved to Arizona." Reyes paused. "We found a payment to an account registered in his wife's name dated 2 weeks after the cold case notification." Another pause. "He's being looked at as part of the broader investigation." Sofia stopped walking. She stood on the courthouse steps with the wind off the lake, moving through her hair, and felt the information land. Not with rage. The rage had burned through years ago, had been the fuel that got her through the first 2 years before it cooled into something more useful. What she felt now was something more complicated. The confirmation of a thing she'd suspected added to the architecture of what she already knew, and the architecture got larger and heavier and more complete, and the completeness of it had its own particular weight. "All right," she said. Reyes looked at her. "All right?" "I can't carry every version of this," Sofia said. "I can give you everything I know about what I observed in that estate. I can testify to everything I documented. The rest of it," she paused. "You'll have to do the rest." Reyes studied her for a moment with those patient eyes. "Your father would be—" "Don't," Sofia said, gently. "Please." Reyes nodded. She understood. They walked the rest of the block in silence and parted at the intersection. Pause. The letter arrived on a Thursday in May, forwarded through her attorney from the federal correctional facility where Damien was serving his sentence. Her attorney had flagged it with a note. "You're not required to read or respond to this. Completely your call." She sat with the sealed envelope for 2 days before she opened it. His handwriting was what she'd expected from the desk in his library. Precise, controlled, the penmanship of someone who'd been taught to write carefully and had never stopped. The letter was 2 pages, both sides. He didn't ask for forgiveness. She noted this first, noted that it mattered. He didn't explain himself or contextualize or offer the elaborate architecture of justification that she'd half expected from a man accustomed to constructing arguments. He wrote about what he remembered, specific moments, specific choices, the incremental process by which a person who might have been something else became what he had become. He wrote about his father, who had died when Damien was 17, and about Vittorio filling that space, and about the way a person shaped by grief and power and the continuous application of someone else's will could lose the ability to distinguish what they actually believed from what they'd been taught to. He wrote, "Near the end, I keep thinking about what you said on the courthouse steps, about your father believing that corruption was a choice and not a structure. I've been trying to understand whether I believe that about myself. I don't have an answer yet. I think that's the correct place to be. And at the very end, the last line, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that the ballroom, the way I use that room, I understand what it cost you. Not abstractly. I understand it. Sophia sat with the letter for a long time after she finished it. Then she found a piece of paper and a pen and wrote back. Not long. Half a page. She told him that she'd received the letter and read it. She told him that what he'd written about his father had surprised her, and that surprise was something she hadn't expected to feel. She told him that she had started working, consulting work, financial forensics, helping federal investigators build cases against organized crime financial structures. That it turned out that 3 years of photographing manifests and cross-referencing shell companies had given her a specific and apparently valuable skill set. That she was using her real name again. She wrote, I don't know what the future looks like for either of us. I think that's also the correct place to be. She sealed it and mailed it through her attorney before she could think about it long enough to change her mind. But the last thing happened on a Tuesday evening in June, the kind of evening that comes rarely to Chicago. Warm without humidity, the lake flat and silver in the late light, the city temporarily gentle in a way that felt like a concession it was making reluctantly. Sophia walked along the lakefront path south of Navy Pier with her hands in her jacket pockets and the encrypted drive in her hip pocket, which she carried everywhere still, not from necessity now, but from habit. The way people carry things that got them through bad times because the absence of them feels like tempting the universe. She stopped at a bench overlooking the water and sat. She thought about her father, not the memo, not the case, not the reclassification. She thought about him the way she used to think about him before he became evidence, the way he smelled like coffee and old paper, the way he listened to people with his whole body like what they were saying was the most important thing happening in the world. The way he'd taught her Italian at the kitchen table when she was 9 because he thought everyone should speak at least 4 languages, not for utility, but because each language was a different way of being inside a sentence, a different way of understanding that the same reality could be perceived from angles you hadn't considered yet. She had 4 languages now. 5, if she counted Japanese, which she'd learned in a different kitchen at a different table in circumstances her father had never imagined for her. He had not imagined any of the circumstances. He had not imagined the length or the cost of what she would do in his name. She thought he would have understood it, the precision of it, the patience, the refusal to give up, even if he would have been frightened by some of the corners she'd turned. He had been a man who believed in institutions while understanding their corruptibility, and she had spent 5 years existing entirely outside every institution he'd devoted his life to, and she wasn't sure how to reconcile those 2 things yet. Maybe she didn't have to. Maybe the reconciling was the work of years rather than a single evening. The sun was going down over the city behind her, the lake catching the last of it in long horizontal streaks. A jogger passed. 2 teenagers sat further down the path with their feet hanging over the edge, talking with the uninhibited loudness of people who hadn't yet learned that the world was listening. A dog ran past chasing something it was never going to catch, delirious with the effort of the chase itself. Sophia watched the water. She thought about the ballroom, not with bitterness now, not with the specific angular rage that had carried her through the worst nights. She thought about it the way you think about a scar whose cause you finally understand. She had stood in that room and been made small by a man with power and no particular reason to be kind, and the smallness he'd tried to impose on her had not taken root because she was already carrying something larger than his cruelty could displace. She had not become what that room tried to make her. She had not become what 5 years of surviving inside that house could have made her either. Cold all the way through, instrumental, a person for whom other people were only obstacles or resources. She'd felt that version of herself forming sometimes, in the hard nights, when the plan was the only thing she had, and the plan required her to remain untouched by everything around her. She'd felt it, and recognized it, and refused it, not from virtue, but from the understanding that becoming that would mean losing the last version of herself her father had known. She was something else instead, something she was still identifying. The lake did its usual thing, waves small and indifferent, Water ancient and unbothered by anything that had happened on its shores or inside the buildings set back from it. The city behind her hummed its continuous hum. Sophia Valenti, sat on the bench as the last light went out of the sky and felt the strange, specific weight of a life that had come through fire and was still here, still intact in its essential parts, still capable of the things that made it worth having. Not whole. She was not going to pretend whole, but here, awake, her own. The water went dark. The city lights came on behind her, reflected in the lake in long, trembling lines. She sat with them for a while longer. The reflections, the ordinary sounds, the evening going about its business. And then she stood, put her hands back in her pockets, and walked north along the path into whatever came next.